Let's go ahead and get started. So this is Jacqueline Eckern. I'm with Eating Disorder Hope, and I am delighted to have a second conversation with Sara Somers, the author of Saving Sara, a memoir of food addiction. And with that, I'd like to introduce Miss Sara.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be back and talking to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you. We're really pleased to have you here today, and there's been so much interest in the concept of food addiction, and I think your book is very timely. To start us off, can you tell us what motivated you chiefly to go ahead and write the book at this time?
That's a good question. I think I fell into it more than made a decision. Once I moved to Paris, there was an abundance of writing classes everywhere, and I've always wanted to do something with writing. So I started taking the classes, and the only thing I really knew well was how I abused food and abused myself. And I took a week-long writing workshop, and I met April, who is on the webinar. I see her name. And in order to get into the workshop, I had to send 15 pages of something that I'd written, and she saw it. And when she talked to me, she said, "Do you think you could write a book?" And I very sort of frivolously said, "Oh, sure, why not?" And then I thought maybe I'd misheard her, so I had to ask her 3 or 4 times during the workshop. But so I started writing, but for the first 2 years, I don't think that I was really thought of an end goal. And it was somewhere after maybe before the summer of 2018, that I realized that what I was doing was putting my story down on paper, and that my story might be really valuable. And as far as I knew, there weren't any books like this out on the market, where you have a lot of alcohol related stories and people talking about their food addicts aren't as much fun, and they don't do as many charming things as alcoholics. So that's when I decided, really 2 years into writing it, and then I got serious, and it was hard work. I've never written a book before, so that's what I kept in my focus was, I want to tell my story because I want to help people out there, and I don't think people will really get help unless they identify with someone. I never listened to anybody that didn't know what it was like being heavy and not able to stop eating. I didn't think they knew what they were talking about.
For someone watching, what would they consider to be identifying factors of food addiction from your perspective?
Well, the first thing I think is just binging. In my case, it was binging, that I would start with a desire to have a dessert, a cup of ice cream, and then I couldn't stop. And as I got older, the couldn't stop got very closer and closer to the original cup of ice cream. And then, by the time I was in my 30s, I was going out shopping for binge foods. And for me, they were sugar and carbohydrates. That was my favorite. The other things are just hiding, not telling anybody, the thinking that goes on. You think about food, you think about not eating or eating, how heavy you are, how much weight you're going to lose, the next diet you're going to go on, or shoot, I just blew it again. Walking down the street, seeing your image in the shop window and being disgusted and ashamed, and that would send me into a binge. But other people, if they saw something in a shop window and I would think a normal person might get motivated to do something if they saw an image that didn't please them. But for me, it brought on pain, a lot of shame, and I needed to binge. I medicated myself with food because I was in so much pain all the time. So that telling lies, trying to find help, going to therapists. I think there are a lot of things that in the physical and emotional and mental realm that people who talk to me, we can come from very different lifestyles and very different class of people, and yet that sense of what it's like to be binging on food, unable to stop, and the way we feel about ourselves seems to be identical.
Yeah, that's really outstanding that people have a book they can read and a voice that explains something that hasn't been addressed as generously as you have. And I use the term generous because I think in your book you really share some things that others might be reluctant to share because they might feel humiliated, but you're caring about other sufferers and wanting them to find some commiseration with you. It's really kind of a beautiful thing. And I think it frees people up to then talk about what's going on with them and if they qualify as food addicts. What kind of programs do you recommend? And what if someone kind of is bouncing around, whether with dieting or eating disorder treatment or OA groups? How do you find the right fit for you, again, in your opinion?
Well, that's a good question. It's an excellent question. For me, I have to look backwards, and I am pretty sure that nothing would have fit because I didn't want to work at it for a long time. I was into my 60s by the time I got serious about realizing I had a real problem. I wanted a diet, and I wanted to get slender and then move on with my life. And in my case, it was not just a physical problem. I wasn't just overweight. It was mental and emotional. Every behavior that I had supported my addictive eating. And the older I got, the more entrenched those behaviors were. And so in retrospect, I had to find something that would not just help me diet, but show me how to change my behaviors, how to get out of my own way, if you will. And I talk about going into Gray Sheeters Anonymous, and in the end, I mean, it was a perfect fit for me. What I needed was I needed somebody else to tell me what to eat, because if I got to my mid 60s not knowing what to eat, that was a pretty clear message that I just couldn't figure it out myself. And so I needed somebody else to tell me exactly. I needed a black and white program that was very much like Alcoholics Anonymous, where there wasn't any wiggle room, because I can wiggle if you give me the room, and the wiggle is always downhill. So I needed that. I needed a really caring community that loving, and by that I mean kind, that people understood I had a disease and weren't going to shame me if I had a relapse, but also were going to be straight and direct with me, that this is serious, this can kill you. Killed Mama Cass, it's killed other people, and so I went to Overeaters Anonymous, which is how I found Gray Sheeters Anonymous. I went to Overeaters Anonymous, has quite a few branches as people tried to figure out how black and white you need to be. And for me, I think of myself as a low bottom eater. I just needed the black and white, no wiggle room, tell me what to do. And I find that what I'm doing now on Gray Sheeters Anonymous is the easiest thing that I could possibly be doing, because I don't have to think about it. I'm told, eat this, don't eat this, have this amount, you don't have more. And I make a commitment every day to a friend and say, I'm going to eat this, because it's much harder for me to break a commitment to someone else than to myself. So I don't have to think about it, which gives me a lot of room to think about other things, to write a book, to move to Paris, to do things that I never thought were possible, you know, especially in your late 60s. So I can only really say why I feel comfortable in the program I'm in. And I think it's unique in that it's based on the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, whereas a lot of the other food programs are based on the mother program, which was Overeaters Anonymous. So I think it's unique, and I love it. And I'm very grateful that I was willing. It's very hard work. It's very hard work to not just change your eating, but to change your thinking, and to really get honest that if I think this way, and I'm probably going to end up doing this action. If I do this action, I will probably end up eating. And to be clear that all through my life, that same thing happened. Why wouldn't it keep happening? So I think it was a good 2 or 3 years before I felt any confidence that I'd actually made changes and I could get on a plane, go to other countries, do things, and that I'd be taken care of. I think it's the best way to.
It sounds like it's been this lifestyle of addressing disordered eating, if you will, in your life has provided a platform where you have sailed and just become sort of able to follow your dreams and your best self, which is so inspiring, I think, for many. And what's interesting is you publish this book, so we are seeing so much research coming out discussing things about the addictive components of food or anything pleasurable. There's what we call process addictions, and then there's alcohol, you know, there's pornography, there's shopping, there's food. So you're a leader in this discussion. I know one of the researchers we really have a lot of respect for is Dr. Mark Gould, and he has written an article where he talks about Dr. Dana Small's Yale-affiliated small group that does some research that has found that humans place the highest value on carb and fat combinations. What do you think about that?
I think that's probably correct. The carbohydrates and sugar, fat and carbohydrates, they work. You know, in my case, they weren't necessarily pleasurable because I really do think I was medicating myself and trying to tap down the pain I was in. But they're almost all those foods are, you know, if you're going to have a party out with your friends, you get the pizza and you get the chips and that stuff. Yes. Birthday parties, weddings, all sorts of celebrations have that food. So there's not just the combination, there's the mental thought that goes with it, you know, that there's celebrations, and sometimes it's the first thing that crosses people's minds when I say, well, I don't eat sugar and carbohydrates. And they say, well, what if my son gets married and I can't eat cake? And I'll say, how old is your son? They'll say 10. So it's that frightening. So I think she's probably correct. And certainly in my case, she is. I'm not an expert really, except for my own story. So, but that's what, talking to many food addicts, I would say that's correct.
Yeah, do you think that there's room for the international professional community, as well as people that struggle with food and weight, to maybe accept a continuum that's, and I'm really asking your opinion on this, if there's food addiction over here and possibly some people can do what's called intuitive eating, where they're really dialed into their hunger and fullness cues and can respond to that, and all kinds of things in between. I personally think there's room for what works for the individual, and we really embrace that at Eating Disorder Hope. What are your thoughts on that?
I probably tried everything that was available. And when you said the intuitive, I thought of Thin Within. I don't remember how many years ago it was, but I remember that sitting in a room and being told to taste something, and chew slowly and all that. And I don't believe it could work for an addict, because to be a food addict, you have to be addicted to something. So I don't think everybody that has problems with food is a food addict. And I believe that each one of us that has problems with food probably knows whether we've crossed the line or not. I knew that I'd crossed the line. I just didn't want to admit it. And I thought if I was in denial, maybe I'd be a different person. But I mean, we are a society that has problems with food. I was reading Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times, and before this pandemic started, he was really concerned about obesity and loneliness, and quoted somebody like Dr. Small, but from Harvard, who predicts that in 2030, there are going to be 35,000 people dying from obesity a week. I mean, it's just, I mean, numbers, it's like Monopoly. You can't think of those numbers. So it's a huge problem. And a continuum is probably necessary. I know that personally, I was so tired of all the diets and all the hope and all the dashed this, that I needed something that was easy. I didn't want to go to therapy for the rest of my life trying to figure out, you know, how not to eat. I just didn't want to work that hard. I mean, I probably sound like a baby, but I had tried it for till I was in my mid-60s, and all that hard work came to nothing. I'm a pretty smart girl, and all my self-knowledge came to nothing. It didn't matter what I knew. Addiction, by definition, is more powerful than any human power. So, you know, that's why I need a group and I need a group that believes exactly like I do. Again, that slippery slope. If you give me wiggle room, I'll wiggle right through. And so that's what I found, is a group of people. We're like-minded. We may not like all the same foods and we might not eat the same way, but we do believe that we are lucky and that we could die from this disease in some way. Does that answer your question, or did I get totally off track?
No, I think that's great. I'm really appreciating your perspective on this and your insights, and I think the viewers are as well. I would love for you to read a little bit of your book, if you would, for us. Maybe that chapter 4 section, people would enjoy hearing just a little bit of the tone and nature of the book.
I'm looking at the names, and probably everybody's read the book, but bear with me. By the time I was 15 years old, there was no doubt in my mind that something was drastically wrong with me. I thought it was the family I'd been born into. I thought eating was the solution to my misery, even though it was obvious to everyone else that the way I thought about food and was gaining weight wasn't normal. I didn't want anyone to see or to know what I was doing. I was too ashamed to admit what I was doing. I wanted to be cured of suffering, cured of my weight problems, but I didn't want any suggestions from anyone. My emotional state of being was a roller coaster. I might have been diagnosed as bipolar. My swings were so dramatic, but I wasn't bipolar. I was a food addict. I had moments of joy that made me high, followed by deep depressions. I was either stealing 5 dresses at a time or being angelically good. The word moderation did not exist for me. I knew the definition of the word, but when my father would helplessly watch me scarfing down food and offer, "Can't you try and eat in moderation?" the answer was no. I was completely incapable. The shame made it impossible for me to admit to him that I felt powerless, that I was scared and felt hopeless. I didn't want him saying anything to me, reminding me of that powerlessness. So I began my eating, binging in secret. At least I thought I did. Binging is an intimate act, which is one of the ways it's different. It's a different kind of addiction from alcoholism. Alcoholics can succumb to their addiction at bars and be considered the life of the party. The beginning stages of alcoholism are socially acceptable. Food addicts, on the other hand, always binge alone. The act of binging is both compulsive and shameful. Even in the midst of a binge, we are trying with every ounce of our willpower not to binge. As my binging progressed, I would often be sitting on the floor in front of the refrigerator or on my bed surrounded by cookie crumbs, crying my eyes out while compulsively continuing to binge. I desperately wanted things to be different. I wanted to be well, not to be engaging in these behaviors, and yet I couldn't stop. If you think this sounds a lot like insanity, you're right. It is a type of insanity. My family loved ice cream. My mother would buy it in half-gallon rectangular boxes. There was always a box of coffee, a box of vanilla, and often the triumvirate of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry in the freezer. After our family dinner, one parent would serve each of us a single helping for dessert, but that was never enough for me. Wanting more doesn't accurately describe the single-minded obsession of the addict, of wanting what you want now, or how that can drive your whole evening. In our split-level home, my bedroom was a half a floor below the kitchen, whereas my parents' and my sister's bedrooms were a half a floor above. Down in my room, I'd wait impatiently, supposedly doing homework, until it seemed to me that all was quiet in the kitchen. Then I'd sneak back up, go to the freezer, and retrieve the half-gallon carton of ice cream. Standing in front of the freezer, often with the door still open, I'd grab a spoon, open the opposite end from the one already opened, and eat as much and as fast as I could. That's all I want, I'd tell myself, as if I had some control over the quantity. I'd really mean it at the moment, I thought it, even though I hadn't tasted anything and it had not been satisfying at all. I ate so fast that I often got brain freeze. Then I'd hold my head under the faucet, lapping up warm water until my head stopped hurting. This all took place in less than 5 minutes. All the while, I was in a state of intense anxiety, wondering if my parents could hear me and come investigate what was going on. I'd creep back down to my room, returning to my homework that I hadn't started. But it was impossible to focus when all I was thinking about was the ice cream in the freezer, calling my name. I might hold out for as much as 15 minutes, but then I'd be sneaking back upstairs to the freezer and doing it all over again. Eating fast and furious, getting brain freeze, running warm water, gulping it down, and escaping back downstairs before my parents were any the wiser. This repeated itself until I realized that there was only half an inch of ice cream between my binge side and the side that had been open for the family. Then with great effort and an even greater fear of the consequences, I left the ice cream box as it was. I didn't have a clue what was wrong. If my dad suggested it might be a lack of willpower, I flew off the handle. Everything he said that he thought might be helpful only served to bring to my attention the fact that my behavior felt completely out of my control. I hated myself and I hated everyone in my family who made me aware of my powerlessness. My home was a constant battleground. There were no words at that time for families that lived with and survived an active addict, but I'm sure all four of us were suffering from PTSD by the time I graduated high school.
Very moving. I think so many of us can relate. I know I can identify with the painful shame that we've gone through with binge eating, and you articulate it well. We have a question from the audience, and it's from Joe, wondering if you were overweight as a child.
I was. I wasn't as overweight as I thought I was. I've seen pictures of myself, but I was overweight enough, for instance, at 13, that I looked like I was about 19. So I was a big girl. But by the time I was 15, I weighed 174 pounds. And I think Joe's from the UK, so I'm not sure what that translates into. But I would say at that point, I was about 40 pounds overweight for a 15-year-old. And I got up to almost 200 before I started doing something serious. So I lost about 60 pounds. But there are people I've met. Somebody yesterday told me that she'd weighed 410 pounds. It's a horrible disease. It's just horrible. So yes, I was an overweight child. And I had a sister who was not overweight. That made it hard.
We have another question as well, which is, what would you say to a person who has a lot of fear to begin addressing their binge eating?
I think the most sensible thing to me would be to find somewhere where people that do address it are talking, and just listen. And just listen, go to some of these meetings. There's plenty around, and see whether you identify or not. And if you don't identify with one group, try another group. But I think the courage built to speak builds up by knowing that you're not alone. I could never have talked about the way I ate and the things I did with food if I didn't know that there were other people out there who did exactly what I did. I know I'm not alone. I know I'm not the only person on earth who completely abused my body with food, and abused food, which is a good thing to have. It keeps us alive. So that would be my advice, is find a place that you can listen and find out where you belong and that you're not alone.
And another question is, where do you suggest people go to find your book, order your book?
Well, that's an interesting question. It is on Amazon, but the other day it was taken off of the UK Amazon, and hopefully it will be back on. But in the United States, it's up on Amazon. There's also, for people who support independent booksellers like I do, there's a website called bookshop.org, and you can go in and order it there, and they will find the independent bookstore closest to you and sell it to you a little bit less expensive than the book is, and the extra money goes into supporting independent bookstores, which I think is a wonderful thing. They are actually coming back, I've been told. So,
That is wonderful. I
yeah.
appreciate you pointing that out for us. Another question we've had is, are you satisfied with your weight now?
I don't think I've ever been satisfied with my weight, ever. It just, I mean, I'm going to be 73 next month, and my metabolism, I know, always has been slow and slowed down. And so I have a little bit of trouble with the aging process with food. So I've had to reduce my food. When I don't think about just my weight, but I think about my mental state, my emotional state, the things that I'm grateful for, then I'm very satisfied, because I don't weigh 200 pounds. I weigh a lot less than that. And I have a life that is well worth living. And probably, you can quote me later on this. I think that probably it doesn't matter all that much. I'm not overweight, but I always wanted to be twiggy. So that was a goal I was never going to reach.
Thank you for being so authentic and open with us, because I don't know many that don't have some questions about their weight and body image, that at least reach out to Eating Disordered Hope. And as you have gone through this journey, one of the things I heard from my mentor, I'm a therapist, was that oversaw my internship, was that she doesn't always feel happy with her weight, but she feels very compassionate towards her body. And I thought that was interesting. Do you feel that you've grown in compassion and appreciation for the health and functionality of your body?
That is so lovely. Well, your mentor was parts of my body. I used to backpack a lot, and I remember being on a mountain somewhere in Yosemite, and suddenly realizing that I had strong legs, that I could only get up the mountain at strong legs. And I had my right hip replaced 3 years ago, and I was back in Yosemite. I went back to the United States to get my hip replaced, but within 10 weeks, I was back in Yosemite. I wasn't hiking up any mountains, but I was hiking up a few trails. So I just, I am so grateful that my legs are strong and they take me places. I love to walk. And I sound like I'm making different parts of my body, but I want time to think about that. It's such a beautiful thing to be compassionate about your whole body. I'll tell you what I have compassion for, what I have done to my body, and it has survived me. It has survived my abuse and is in pretty good shape. I mean, we fill out things that, ask us, are you in good health, very good health? And I'm in very good health. I mean, I wasn't too scared about getting sick with the virus, although I didn't put myself in harm's way. But yeah, I think I can honestly say, and I've never thought about it before, Jacqueline, so thank you. I think I'm very compassionate to this body that survived my abuse and is still going strong.
Oh, that's so inspiring. Well, I know we need to wrap up pretty soon, but I did want to ask one more question from Rose, which is, what is a typical daily menu that works for you?
I don't change my menu very much. I'm not a cook, so I often have the same meals because I love them. And I want to preface it by saying that before I went into any kind of recovery, I hated food. I thought food was the enemy. And so one of the things I had to be taught was to enjoy my food and to only make meals that I absolutely loved. So if something reminded me of a diet, that I wasn't to eat that. So in the morning, I usually have fruit and yogurt or, milk in my coffee, but I end up with 4 ounces of protein, basically. And a nutritionist at Kaiser tells me how many grams of protein are good for you. And for lunch, I'll have protein and usually a cooked vegetable and a salad and some oil and vinegar on my salad. And for dinner, I will have protein, cooked vegetable, and a large salad with oil and vinegar. The amounts are quite large, and at first it seemed hard. I didn't think I could eat that much, but in fact, when I really got honest, I'm a binge eater. I like bulk. So the fact that our servings, and again, I didn't come up with this food plan. This was given to me. But the fact that there's so much food, it fits me and my personality because I like to be full. I mean, there are days that it's hard to eat, but they're few and far between. I do not eat carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates. I don't eat any sugar of any kind. I read labels. When I just buy anything, I pick it up and I read the label. If sugar is 4th or higher, it's enough in there to make a difference. And I don't want to find out if it would make that difference. So I don't eat starch, I don't eat potatoes or rice or anything like that. So my carbohydrates come from fruit, winter squash, lots of vegetables have quite a bit of carbohydrates. It feels very well balanced. I'm in great health. So, and I've found out extreme athletes eat very similarly. That's how, yeah, when they're in training, this is how they eat. So that was another thing of not feeling alone, that it wasn't just us food addicts that ate this way.
Well, you look like the picture of health, and there's been a comment that you're beautiful and that your weight looks ideal. If you'll indulge us, there are a couple more questions that came up that
Yeah.
I think they would love to hear from you. One is from Patsy saying, for food addicts who commit to following a system, does the hunger or food urgency lessen and fade away? Interesting.
Absolutely. For me, it did. Again, I'm not an expert. I can't say for other people, but people I know, they all say the same thing. At some point, it just the craving gets lifted, and I feel very comfortable going places where there's foods that I don't eat, but I need to have a reason for being there. I wouldn't just walk. I have a beautiful patisserie shop down on the corner. It's so beautiful. You don't have anything like it in the United States. It's so beautiful. You look in the window, and it's all I think about is they are so artistic. They're so talented. I don't think in terms of I want to eat it, but I wouldn't go in there for any reason. So I think I'm reasonable about it, but no, I don't have any cravings. There are times periodically if I'm really bored, I'll think I'm hungry, but usually I'm tired or I'm thirsty. I have to watch that I drink enough water. And I'm speaking for myself, but that's also what a lot of my friends tell me, that they didn't think they could do this if it wasn't lifted.
Excellent. And then the other question was from Robin. She says, I am your age and your story is my story. I did find relief at Food Addicts Anonymous. However, I could not stick to all the rules for more than a year. Do you have suggestions for me now?
Wow. I've never been to a Food Addicts Anonymous meeting. I know about them, and I know it's somewhat similar to Gray Sheeters Anonymous. I don't think of what I do as having rules. I think of them, as guidelines, the way if you're going to have a car that it's suggested that you keep it tuned up if you want it to work well. So I kind of put those guidelines in that category. If I want what I've got today, I'm going to weigh and measure my food. I'm going to check in, talk to some people that are like-minded, and remind myself I'm not alone, and learn how to not think about myself and think about other people. I mean, that was a huge thing. I'm trying to think of other rules that, we have very strict, strong guidelines around the food, but that's because it's been road tested that it works, and the black and whiteness works for me because I'm a sneaky person. And, I don't sneak today, but that doesn't mean that it's gone. Give me a chance. So I'm very grateful for some of those black and white guidelines, because they really keep me in check. I just thought of this, it has nothing to do with food, but when I was a freshman in college, my father came to visit, and we were walking somewhere, and I was telling him how he was asking me about my classes, which I was sleeping through. And I was telling him, well, I'm 18 and I feel free and I can do whatever I want. And he kind of looked at me and he said, you're not free. Unless you have some good boundaries, you're a prisoner. You can't move. You get freedom when you've got boundaries. And I don't know what made me think of that, but that's what I feel today, is that I've got some really good boundaries around not poking at my addiction, and I feel totally free. I feel free of craving. I feel free of acting addictively. I feel free of the really bad behaviors I did to get food and mistreating people. So I hope that's an answer. It's probably not the answer you wanted, but the program I go to is very similar to Food Addicts Anonymous, but I've been told that we're a little gentler.
Sara, you've just done an excellent job today. Thank you so much. As we wrap up, can you tell us where people can learn more, find your blog, any resources or websites you suggest?
Well, my blog, I've been doing since I found out the book was going to be published. It's on food addiction, and it's called saving-sara without an H.org. And I try to write on it once a week. Sometimes people will write me and say, will you talk more about this or that? Graysheet.org is where you can find out more about my program. We're the only anonymous program that doesn't have the problem in the title. We have the solution in the title. So if you Google and you go into Can't Stop Eating or something like that, it doesn't come up, which is very interesting. Yeah, people have to find their own programs, and the Overeaters Anonymous, all of them are available online. I just think mine's wonderful. So graysheet.org, my blog. I have an Instagram account, Saving Sara the Book, and I try and just put up little inspiring sayings to keep going another day, things like that.
Wonderful. Well, I also hope that in the future you'll continue to do some contributions to Eating Disorder Hope, because we really support your work and your bravery in going out and talking about your experience to help other people, making lemonade out of lemons. So thank you for your time today, Sara.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody that came to listen.
All right.